Everyone knows Rosa Parks. December 1955, Montgomery, Alabama. She refused to give up her seat on the city bus. But nearly 90 years before Rosa Parks, a black schoolteacher in Philadelphia did the exact same thing. On a railroad train, she sued the railroad company. She won her case, and then something happened that would haunt this country for 60 straight years. Her name was Mary Miles. You have never heard of her, and the reason why is far worse than anything you might imagine right now. Because the system took her courage and turned it into a weapon against her own people. This is the story of how that happened. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, January 1858. The first horse-drawn streetcar rolls through the city. These streetcars are the first public transit Philadelphia has ever seen. Within months, new lines are running across the city. But from the very first day, there is a rule. If you are black, you cannot ride inside the car. You cannot sit in any seat at all. On some lines, black riders stand on the open front platform next to the driver, exposed to the rain, exposed to snow and wind. On other lines, they are banned completely. If you are black in Philadelphia, you walk, or you hire a private coach at your cost. Frederick Douglass called Philadelphia the most discriminatory city in America when it came to public transit. Think about that. Philadelphia was one of the biggest abolitionist centers in the nation, the same city that helped run the Underground Railroad. The same city where free black communities had existed for a century, and still a black woman could not sit down on a streetcar. Then the Civil War comes. More than 11,000 black soldiers begin training at Camp William Penn just north of the city. Their mothers, wives, and sisters need to visit the camp. They carry food and medicine and bandages for the men going off to war. But the streetcar companies refuse to let them ride inside. They can stand outside in the cold, or they can walk. That is all. Your son is willing to give his life for this country, but you are not allowed to sit down on a public streetcar. Think about it. The women of Black Philadelphia decided they had enough. What happened next became the first civil rights movement on transit. A movement that started a full century before Rosa Parks stepped onto that bus in Montgomery, and almost nobody remembers it now. The fight came from three directions at once. The first was led by William Still, known as the father of the Underground Railroad. Still believed in working within the system. He wrote letters, he gathered petitions, he published columns calling out the lines. His campaign was careful and measured and respectable. After 7 full years of work, it had produced almost no real results. The second direction came from Octavius Catto, a teacher, an athlete, a civil rights leader who was barely in his mid-20s. In May 1865, Catto boarded a whites-only streetcar, sat in the middle, and refused to leave. He would not move. The conductor cut the horses loose and left the car in the middle of the road. Catto stayed in his seat all night. Papers ran it. A year later, Catto stood before a packed crowd and made his case. He spoke the words that came to define the streetcar movement. He said to vindicate their manhood and no longer suffer defenseless women and children to be attacked by ruffianly conductors. But the third direction was the most dangerous. It was the one history forgot entirely. It was the black women of Philadelphia. They did not write letters, they did not make speeches at meetings, they walked up to the streetcars and climbed on, every day. In 1862, an elderly minister named Reverend Robinson was forced to stand on an open platform during a heavy storm. The car struck a hay wagon. Robinson never recovered from his injuries. His passing became the first casualty of this movement. In 1865, a woman known as Mrs. Derry tried to board a streetcar after nursing wounded Union soldiers all night. The conductor and his companions attacked her and forced her off the car. Derry took the case to court. She won $50. These women were teachers and nurses and volunteers. They were riding streetcars to reach the soldiers fighting for the Union, and they were being beaten for it. In the city of brotherly love, in the birthplace of American democracy, this happened here. And then there was Mary Miles, a schoolteacher from a small community called Hinsonville in Chester County near Philadelphia. Hinsonville was a settlement of free black landowners near Lincoln University. These families had held their land for generations. The people there were free and educated. They had been part of a proud tradition for over a century, and they were tired of less. A newspaper of the era described Mary Miles as a woman of education and refinement. She was not a troublemaker, but she was done. Around 1866, Miles walked into the railroad depot at 31st and Chestnut Streets and bought herself a ticket. She boarded the train, and she sat down in the middle of the car. Not at the end, not on the platform outside, in the middle. The conductor approached her. He reminded her of the rules. Black passengers were required to sit at the far end of the car only. Mary Miles refused to move. She had purchased a ticket. She had the right to sit where she chose. She stayed and said nothing. What happened next is not entirely clear. Most of the court records were discarded in the 1980s. But we know the end. She was put off the train, maybe at the depot, maybe somewhere along the line in Delaware County. She never made it home that day. But here is what made Mary Miles different. She did not just get angry about what happened to her on that train, she got a lawyer. Mary Miles decided to sue the West, Chester, and Philadelphia Railroad, and what followed would reshape American legal history. Not the way she hoped it would, not the way anyone predicted, but in a way that shaped the lives of millions for 60 years. In early 1867, the case of Miles versus the West, Chester and Philadelphia Railroad went to a Philadelphia court. The railroad said it was reasonable to seat passengers so as to prevent contacts arising from what they called natural repugnancies. In plain language, they argued white people should not have to sit near black people, and that keeping them apart was good policy. The court disagreed. The judge ruled the railroad could not compel a passenger to change her seat on account of her color alone. Mary Miles won her case. She was awarded $5 in damages. The amount was tiny, but the legal principle behind it was huge. A court in Philadelphia had just said, you cannot force a person to move to a different seat because of the color of their skin. This was 1867, 88 years before Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat in Montgomery. 88. But the railroad was not finished. They filed an appeal. The case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court itself. The appeal landed on the desk of the Chief Justice of Pennsylvania. His name was Daniel Agnew, and he had a very particular past. Agnew grew up in Mississippi. His first cousin married Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy. That is who decided this. Agnew once said that if his family had stayed in the South, he would have been a rebel. This was the man who held the final word. In the fall of 1867, Agnew issued his ruling. He overturned the lower court. He ruled against Miles on all counts, and the words he wrote in that opinion would echo through American courtrooms for the next 6 decades. Here is what he said. Agnew wrote that separating passengers to preserve order and decorum and prevent collisions from repugnancies was not unreasonable. Then he went further. He wrote that if a black person sits beside a white person, the law cannot conquer the aversion some feel. The highest court in Pennsylvania just told the country that white discomfort matters more than black dignity. Let that sink in. The court ruled that separating riders by race was not only legal but reasonable. that white anger was the law's true concern. Separate is not unequal. Separation is reasonable. Separation is order. That was the principle the court laid down for the nation. The case was called Westchester and Philadelphia Railroad versus Miles. It became one of the most cited rulings in the country. 29 years later, a man named Homer Plessy refused to leave a whites-only car in Louisiana. His lawyers needed a precedent. They found the Miles case. They cited it directly. It became part of the legal architecture that supported what was coming next. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled in Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate but equal became the law of the entire land. Miles had tried to tear down a wall. She won in court, and the system took her victory, reversed it, and built the wall higher. Here is the bitter irony. While Miles was losing her appeal, another woman was fighting the exact same battle a different way. Her name was Caroline LeCount. She was a teacher, a school principal, and the partner of Octavius Cato. She chose another path. While Miles fought through the courts, Cato and LeCount took the legislative route. They went to Harrisburg and lobbied lawmakers. On March 22, 1867, Governor Geary signed a law banning racial separation on all streetcars in the state. 3 days later, LeCount tested it. She flagged down a streetcar at 11th and Lombard. The conductor refused to stop for her. LeCount found an officer nearby. She told him what happened. The officer said he had never heard of the new law. He did not know. But LeCount had come prepared. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a printed copy of the law itself. She handed it over. The conductor was arrested on the spot. He was fined $100. The law was real. LeCount had just proven it herself. 2 women, same city, same fight, same year. Miles won in court and then lost everything. LeCount carried the law in her pocket. One path led through a courtroom where a judge with Confederate ties reversed a victory. The other path led through direct action. Now trace the line forward. In 1867, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court turned Miles's courage into a tool for separation. In 1896, that tool was used in Plessy versus Ferguson. The highest court in the land said separate but equal stood. What followed was Jim Crow. Separate schools, separate fountains, separate entrances, separate waiting rooms, separate everything. For 58 years, the doctrine of separate but equal governs the daily lives of millions of Black Americans in this country. A doctrine built in part on the case of a schoolteacher from Hinsonville who wanted nothing more than to sit in a railroad seat. It would not end until 1954, when the Supreme Court finally reversed Plessy and Brown versus Board of Education. 1 year later, in December 1955, a woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery. The whole world learned her name. Her story became the defining moment of the movement. That story is important. It changed all. But here is what the world was never told. The woman who did it first did not just lose. Her case was used to build the system. Her courage was not simply forgotten. It was weaponized. Her act of resistance became the legal basis for taking away her rights. That is the story of Mary Miles. After the ruling, she kept going. She applied to teach in the South with a Quaker organization. She was hired in 1869. She spent 6 years teaching formerly enslaved people in Virginia and in North Carolina. And then she vanished from the record. No monument, no plaque, no street named after her, nothing at all. Just complete silence. Her court files were discarded in the 1980s. We do not know when she was born. We do not know exactly when she passed. She was not the only one erased. Caroline LeCount passed in 1923. When she was buried, there was no headstone for 100 years. The grave of the woman who carried the law in her pocket went unmarked. No one placed a stone. A full century. Octavius Cato, the man who sat on the streetcar all night, lost his life on Election Day in 1871. He was 32. Philadelphia had 1,700 monuments on public land. Not one of them honored a black individual until 2017. 1,700 monuments in a city that calls itself the birthplace of liberty. And it took 150 years for one. But people have started to remember. Slowly. In small ways. Not nearly enough. But the long silence is no longer completely total. In 2018, a historian researched the area near 30th Street Station, the same place where Miles once boarded her train. She made a historical marker by hand at a local makerspace and attached it to a fence overlooking the tracks. No permission asked. In 2023, after a century without one, Carolyn LeCount finally received a headstone. 38 donors made it real. There is a campaign now to rename a street honoring the author of the Dred Scott decision. They want to call it LeCount Street, but Mary Miles still has nothing official. No statue, no plaque, no government marker, just one handmade sign attached to a fence. Mary Miles refused to move. She went to court, she won, and the system reversed her victory and used it to construct Jim Crow. Next time someone says Rosa Parks was the first, remember a school teacher from Hinsonville who did it nearly 90 years before. The city of brotherly love forgot her name. History forgot her name. But now you know it. The forgetting can finally stop here. If her story deserves to be heard, share this video. If you know another forgotten name from history, leave it in the comments.